As an addendum to the New Sounds presentation, I'd like to briefly make two further points: a more direct comparison of the learning paradigms which were described, and a comment on the question of which comes first in vocal development, perception or production. On this slide, I'm comparing the learning pathways for infants and older learners under the conventional auditory matching to target assumptions. The parallel is obvious. As Flagey has said about L2 within his speech learning model, as in L1 development, production is guided by perceptual representations stored in long-term memory. First, the infant or the student is supposed to get his perception right, then this will guide production. The alternative paradigm proposes that there are similarities in the way that infants and L2 students learn speech sounds, but that our teaching shouldn't try to directly replicate the L1 process. Young children and older learners come to the task of learning the pronunciation of a new language with very different strengths and weaknesses. Infants are good at creating perceptual categories out of new sensory data that they encounter. They're also good at motor experimentation. Older learners come to their task understanding already that there will be a correspondence between what they hear and say. However, older learners are in the grip of L1, unable to hear new sounds in L2 and finding it difficult to move out of the highly practiced motor routines that they have for producing L1 speech. These differences lead to the points of difference in the diagram. However, the two important points of similarity are these. Firstly, the process of learning a speech sound starts with motor experimentation and motor development. Infants babble, and it's helpful for older learners to also experiment freely in class. Secondly, the perceptual judgment which evaluates the noise made by the learner within the linguistic system of the new language is not made by the learner himself, but by a social partner, either the infant's caregiver or the student's teacher. The second question is about the order of perception and production. In both infant speech development and L2 acquisition, researchers ask whether perception precedes production, or vice versa, or whether they have some other relationship. Within the new learning paradigm, it can be seen that the question would be too simplistic. One form of perception would precede production, but the form of perception that helps long-term production would lag it. This is a diagram from the Journal of Phonetics paper. It shows how a general auditory inverse model, enabling infants to mimic noises that they hear, develops from an early point. This is labelled Process 1. Speech comprehension, Process 2, starts next. An inverse model dedicated to speech sounds begins its development during the vocal exchanges that enabled mirrored equivalence, Process 3. A child may produce his very first words, Process 4, as whole word shapes, copied from the linguistic environment by a mimicry-type process, which relies on the general auditory inverse model. But as the speech sound inverse model develops, the child is offered an alternative way to adopt words, by serial imitation of their speech sounds, Process 5. While L2 speakers can have various learning trajectories, there will be homologues to all these processes in many L2 learners. The most important point is that the attentional set that recognizes words is not the same as the attentional set that recognizes speech sounds within words. The first will usually precede production. It is most effective to teach the second as part of teaching production itself.